Yeah, so today's talk is the fifth installation in Atom's series on AI and tech in research administration. So we're really looking at how technology and AI is being implemented, both from an ethical standpoint point of view and just generally in day-to-day practices. And so today's talk that Lori's put together for us is on how do we responsibly support researchers with generative AI, GenAI, looking at it from a lens of providing visible and invisible support. So just quickly going through the agenda for today. So we'll start with a couple of introductions, and then we'll run through into Lori's talk. If we have a bit of time, we'll also dive into some of the work that we're doing here at Atom. And as I mentioned, we will have an opportunity at the end to do Q&A. We'll address any of those questions that did come up throughout the talk. And, if you want to come off mute at that point and actually join the conversation, that will be possible as well. But for those who just joined, if you do have questions throughout the next we've got around 50 minutes here, just please put them in the chat below and we'll make sure to address them at the end of during the Q&A session. So yeah, just quick introductions. So on my part, I'm Tome. I'm one of the co-founders here at Atom. I come from a kind of research and technical background myself. So I actually studied physics in the UK up to a master's. Was on track to go do a PhD, but ended up kind of transitioning into tech. I joined an early stage startup as founding engineer instead of going down and starting my PhD. But my heart's always been in the sciences and research generally. I grew up surrounded by it. My father was a professor of mathematics. And so, I saw both the good sides, the bad sides, all the bureaucracies, the red tape. And, I after a bit of time as a founding engineer, I realized I wanted to really build products to support the research ecosystem. And that's where Atom came from. So generally speaking, we build AI tooling to support researchers and research administrators. I'll touch a bit more on what we do later in the call. But yeah, that's me. I just wanted to say a quick word about Lori. I will also let her kind of introduce herself. But Lori and I have kind of been talking for a little while here. She's actually one of our kind of expert advisory board. So she's been really helpful in kind of helping Atom get off from zero to what it is today. She's the assistant vice president for research administration at Colorado State University. She's been a recognized leader, in all things research administration and operations with, I think, around 30 years of experience in higher education. We met recently at the SRAI conference where she's given talks on AI, the responsible adoption of AI and how we can roll it out across higher education. And yeah, we're incredibly fortunate to have Lori with us today to share her insights on how AI is kind of transforming research administration. And yeah, really pleased to have you here, Lori. I'll kind of let you do your own intro as well if you want. You could probably do yourself more justice, but thanks for being here.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. As Tomer said, I'm now at Colorado State University. I've been here for about 6 weeks, and I've worked in research administration for a really long time. And one of the things that's great about research administration is adjusting to technologies that help us do our jobs and help us serve faculty better. So I'm glad to be here to talk about that.
Awesome. Cool. So I think basically we can pass over to you, Lori. I know you've got a kind of deck that you want to go through. So if you want to share your screen now, I will stop sharing mine and pass over to you. Looking forward to this.
All right, can you see that okay?
I think it needs to, yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, great. So one of the things that I really wanted to start talking about is how research administrators were at sort of this really pivotal time in helping our faculty understand how to use generative AI and the tools around it in the work they do for research. Because one of the things, especially if you're a research administrator at a university or college, your faculty who are instructors already are aware of what they think about the use of AI with their students using it. But the way that they might use it is different, and there might be a little bit of tension in how they are teaching students, but how they themselves plan to use it in their work for research. But there are a lot of things that research administrators can do right now after we log off this call to make impacts, even if you don't, even if your institution is not paying for a licensed version of a GPT or a generative tool. You can use these tools without compromising privacy or business information that is sensitive. You can figure out ways to use your time more wisely so that you can spend more time working with faculty to support them. And you can help researchers understand how to use AI and what the sort of regulatory framework around it is with the people that they might encounter, including sponsors, your own institution, and publishers. But if you are on the side of an institution that is investing in AI tools locally as an enterprise, even more things that can be done in a way that is safe and governed by your data governance structure at your institution. There are a lot of things to consider when we talk about responsible use of AI and how to get that through to your faculty researchers. One thing is your data management and sharing and public access policies, the way that they publish, the way that they share data. We don't even know what the impacts of AI is going to be in that space, but it will be there. It will almost certainly be there in AI being used to evaluate data sets that are shared out of federally funded research, for instance. An even bigger consideration is data governance on your campus or in your organization. Who gets to say that you can use AI tools at your organization? What are the parameters around the kind of data that is being used in those systems that is your institution's data? What limits are there? What kinds of large language models is your institution investing in to protect that data? And what kind of guidance are you being given, even if the answer is not very much, around how to use these tools effectively from your campus or your organization's point of view? Because there are a lot of things to think about there. And one is that this expectation of confidentiality. And I use that phrase to kind of talk about how nobody really knows what is out there about them in the public sphere until they start looking, and then it freaks them out a little bit. And I mean completely in the public sphere, not things that are in your institutional systems necessarily, but your ability to find things about a faculty member and their work it's actually not that difficult. You can find a lot of publicly available information, but what AI tools do is make that data collection faster. And so their understanding of how they look how they look to the public is not even formed yet, because they don't realize how much is easily found by an AI tool around their grants that are public, their publications that are public, and other things that are out there, including on their own front-facing profile pages or institutional pages that bring together a lot of information about that one faculty member, including even the classes they teach. And then there's also this business sensitive information idea. So there's a lot of data we handle on a campus or in a research admin organization that isn't necessarily private or confidential, but shouldn't be shared outside of people who have a business need to know it, for instance. So things that you wouldn't want to show up on the front page of your local newspaper about your campus, that you have to be thinking about where it goes when it goes into a generative AI tool and who has control of that data once it's already there. And then, of course, there's, all of the regulations we have to deal with, particularly if we're on a higher ed campus. So FERPA when it comes to student data, HIPAA when it comes to data when you've got an academic medical center or affiliated hospital or clinics, export control data, and controlled unclassified information. So there are a lot of things that you don't want to put into a generative AI tool without knowing what the parameters are, knowing who's in control of it. So again, like a free version of ChatGPT, for instance, you wouldn't load identifying student data into, for instance. But if your institution has a walled off language model, you might do that. But you also would be working with data governance people who tell you whether or not those kinds of things are allowed. So there's a lot to be considered about what data is used and when, and how to be careful when you're doing that. Some other things are understanding sponsor and publisher policies. One of the things that's really interesting, and I feel like I've been talking about AI for a while now, and there's a lot of things that have not moved in this space. So many sponsors don't address the use of AI in proposal creation at all. Some may say they want it cited, but more commonly, the answer is they don't even address it. One of the things they will address is you don't get to use generative AI tools to complete peer review if you're a peer reviewer who's reviewing other proposals for funding decisions. And the answer to, the reason for that is quite explainable and understandable. You wouldn't want your own idea that you submit a proposal for just out there in the wild without any kind of limits around who can see that, because that's your idea. That's, your unique thought that you're really trying to gather funding to create a research program out of. So it's understandable that you wouldn't use AI tools to generate peer review documents, because you're then sharing that information in a way that you can't control. And publishers, when faculty go to publish a manuscript based on their research, publisher policies can be quite clear, and so they're often even a little more clear and straightforward than what sponsors do and don't say about AI. And that's that they either want it cited, or they have really clear policies around the use or non-use of AI generated things like images, for example. And that can come up both in the publishing space, but also in the research integrity space, where AI image generation is sort of at this place where people don't trust it quite yet, not sure that it's reasonable to include. So many publishers will say, we don't want it. It isn't just that you cite it, it's that we don't want it at all. We want true images when you're trying to explain a point in a publication about some of the work that your research group has done. There are other things when you think about the ethics of use of AI and generative AI tools. And there are things even outside of this slide that I won't talk about because I'm certainly not an expert. But one of the things is who gets to use it. Is there fairness in who gets to use it on your campus or broadly? If I talk about free ChatGPT usage, the assumption is anyone who wants to use it could, but are there limits on your campus or organization when you have licensed tools? Does everybody have the same understanding or ability to use it and is given the same guidance? Excuse me one second. And I apologize if my voice is going, I'm getting over being sick. And the last bit is understanding bias. I mean, all of the ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, fill in the name of the blank of these generative AI tools. Understanding the bias that exists in them, in that the bias is mostly Western, mostly in English. And so there are things that, the AI doesn't cover everything. And part of it is because of the way they're built and the information that AI tools are gathering from public websites and other places that lean very Western, lean very global North, and lean very English and not many other other languages. And so that's something to think about as you're doing this. And because it also gets to the who gets to use it, what presents a complete picture of what a GPT tool generates when you ask it a question, and is that really complete? And so those are just sort of the higher minded things to think about. There are also other things that, like I mentioned, I won't talk about because I'm not the expert, is, really understanding energy use of AI and impacts on the environment, which is a conversation we should all be looking at and understanding how that works in the future, because that is a big consideration when thinking about the use of AI tools and how that impacts our environment. What I wanted to do is talk through a few ideas about what I would say the safest uses in the research admin lifecycle are for the uses of AI. And I've got a few examples that are sort of on either side of one line. One side is free ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or whichever tool is your favorite, where you're not paying for it, you're just using it to make some tasks in your job a little bit easier. And the other side is your institution is paying for an enterprise license, and you might have a little more latitude in putting in institutional data because that data is closed off and not training the model like it would be in a free version of ChatGPT or one of the other tools. So I'll talk through a few examples in proposal development, awards, compliance, and then training and management. So for proposal development and submission, one of the things that I love, and I've done this a few times, and it does a really good job, is if you have an RFP or a funding opportunity announcement from the NSF or the NIH or anything on a public website, you can ask one of these tools to summarize it. You can ask it really specific questions like, give me one page of the main points of a successful response to this RFP. And you can ask it to highlight different things like call out the deadline, call out any budget limits, things like that, so that, I'm not saying you shouldn't read the RFP, but you often know that sometimes the time you have to respond is limited. So the ChatGPT and other tools like it can do a really good job in summarizing an RFP and giving you good high-level overview so you know where you need to look a little bit deeper. It can also help you polish language on things like budget justifications, letters of support, and your facilities, equipment, and other resources section of a proposal. And on the other side, and again, like everything on the right in my slides here, is assuming that you have an enterprise generative AI license of some kind, whether it's Copilot if you're a Microsoft school, or it's Gemini, or it's ChatGPT, or whatever else it is, but that you have that, and that your institutional data is not training the model, so it's kind of walled. That LLM is walled off. And I'm also assuming that there is some permission for you to do these kinds of things. But because this requires putting institutional data inside that model, where you would not do the same thing if you were only using a free version of one of these tools. So some of these things are like loading the proposal and checking against sponsor requirements. Pages, margins, font, all of that can be really simple and very fast to do that. Doing literature review for a proposal. So some institutions out there, you may have what's called a research information management system. And that's a tool like Elsevier's Pure or Symplectic Elements out of digital science. Tools like that, where there is information gathered about citations and publications of your faculty, often use AI tools to generate literature review so that the PI and their team can review that as and edit it as they're working through a proposal. And that can be really, really helpful. The other thing is taking the RFP that we summarized, putting in the proposal narrative, and asking it to compare it and say, did we, give us an analysis of how well we did responding to the RFP requirements about the science. There are a couple of other things in proposal development that are very helpful too. One is matching opportunities with relevant faculty. If you're using these tools in an enterprise way on your campus, you can look at the things they do. So proposals they submit, awards they receive, classes they teach, publications that they publish, and have an understanding of their total body of work to match them with opportunities in a way that is better than just like sending a mass email from Pivot or another place where you have information about funding opportunities. Like there are ways to make it so that they're more targeted to faculty, and also acknowledge the shifting of their research, because you might have a researcher in geosciences, for instance. Geosciences is a really broad field. You wouldn't want to send someone everything that said geosciences in it. But what AI tools can do is sort of refine what those things look like, so that the things that are more relevant to their current research trajectory are the things that get surfaced to them as opportunities they might want to apply for. It also, gives them a few less emails in their inbox, and the ones they get are a little more targeted and maybe a little more relevant to what they're doing. The other thing these tools can do is take a broad look at the work that your institution is doing through, funded abstracts, funded award information, publications, and all of that, to turn around quick project descriptions for when you have donors or state legislative groups who are ready to fund something, and you need a quick way to explain to a non-scientist what those things are and how their funding could make a really quick impact on those projects. Around receipt of award negotiation, one of the things that I love is, especially for awards that are in the public domain, like federal grants, generating award summary sheets for PIs and co-PIs. The things they really need to know: start and end date, budget limits, any budget things that they need to know about for like prior approval, for instance, things that project timelines around their due dates for progress reports, for instance. And you can also use AI tools without loading data to get suggested language in the negotiation process for a contract. So if you wanted to ask Copilot or ChatGPT, what are some fallback positions on indemnification, for instance, it'll give you a lot of options. So you can use that language if you're working on a negotiation and you don't have one of the tools that does that for you. On the other hand, if your institution is paying for these tools, you can use AI tools to automate the process for PI acceptance of award terms using AI. And going further from my suggested language in the free version, getting some of these tools specifically use AI and machine learning for contract triage and fallback positions on clauses that are usually problems for most of us. Excuse me. And that could be things like publication restrictions, IP terms, jurisdiction and venue, where if something went wrong, where a case might be litigated, and indemnification, specifically if you're a state organization. So these tools can take what is a transactional activity done by a human and generate some output that we still need a human for. We still need a contracting person who has that expertise to review before it goes anywhere. But the repetitive motion of it is taken out of it. So maybe that person can spend a little more time working with the sponsor on negotiation language, following up with the sponsor to reduce our turnaround time on the contract. But a lot of these things are already being done at some institutions to manage the contract process in particular. And some other things around compliance activities. ChatGPT in particular is really good at drafting data management plans that you can draft and then edit the way you need to for proposal. You can identify compliance requirements by award or sponsor. You can ask one of these tools a really generic question about compliance, and it come up with a lot of really good information about, like, how does the NIH want to do things around human subjects, for instance, or animals in research. And you can also have it monitor regulatory changes and have some understanding of updates when things get updated on a policy front, when regulations change. It's just one more tool in your toolkit to understand where that stuff is coming from and to get more timely updates. On the institutional support side, and these are some things that are being piloted at some institutions now, and that's things like IRB protocol triage. And instead of a human going in and saying, this protocol, it needs full review, or it's exempt, or it will get expedited review, same as my contracting example, we still need a human to come in and say, yes, that was a correct assessment. And that's how you train the model to get it better at doing this. But it takes what is a transactional activity that is fairly routine, with the exception that projects change, and makes a call so that IRB staff member can take that work and push it to the IRB committee faster, can take that work and maybe even get IRB approval faster if it's expedited, for instance, so that the work can start faster once they have that approval. And the same thing is happening with animal care protocols. And sort of my last area to think about research administration is for those of you who are training new people, getting people ready for their next promotion. There are a lot of things you can do with free tools, like ask it for a user aid for NIH Assist, or ask it for a user aid for grants.gov. We all know those manuals are hundreds of pages long, and they're very useful, but some of these job aids can be created very quickly and then modified for your own use case in a short amount of time. And, one of the things that I always hear when people say, use AI for this, it's like, well, we have research administration experts who should be able to do this. And it's like, absolutely, yes, you can do it. You do it. And sometimes these kinds of tools just help you do it faster so that you can spend your time on things that you'd rather prioritize, like working with your faculty to meet that deadline, or training faculty on something that they need to know about, so that you're not reading that 200-page grants.gov manual, but you're getting good information out to the folks that need to know it in a very quick way. Another thing is, like, if you're looking at staff and how to provide professional development and training paths to grow the staff on your team, They're very good at developing training calendars, like where should a person be at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, or what does a promotional path from an entry-level research admin in pre-award or post look like to their next promotion, to help give you ideas for managing your team, and also help you be transparent in what that looks like for your team members so that they know what they're growing towards. But one of my very favorite things to use AI tools for is policy development. ChatGPT in particular is very, very good at writing research admin policies. I would say, like, if you ever wanted to try it, use the free version and ask it to write a PI eligibility policy for higher education. It will be way better than you think it's going to be. And part of that reason is that information is out there and freely available on many of our institutional websites. So it's got a lot to learn from. And so policies like that often really only require minor tweaking for your use case. You still have to read it. You still have to make sure that everything would work when you're developing a new policy, but it does a tremendously good job at doing that. And your work is really in vetting it and then modifying it and customizing it for your use case. On the institutional support side, using the data around your institutional proposal submission, award receipt, helps do better prediction and visualization of that data. You know, one of the things that we all end up talking about in the offices of our vice president for research is, if we're in universities in particular, there is one side to a university revenue model that is very easy to predict, and that is student enrollment and revenue. The folks that are working on that side of the house in our campus have a lot of really good inputs and data around students that are new, students that are continuing, and student retention, you know, both in and out of state students, if you're a state organization, grad students, undergrads, what that tuition revenue looks like. Research is not as predictable because, you know, like students, they do a lot of work to push that flow through to get students enrolled and get them to be successful. We do a lot of work on the research side as well, but we don't have control over a lot of the inputs. We don't have control over, like, the current situation, for instance, with federal agencies in the US. But even in the absence of that scenario, we don't have a lot of control over what our RFPs are coming out, what faculty will take jobs at our campus or leave our campus necessarily. I mean, we maybe have a little bit of control there depending on what's going on, but for the most part, these kinds of things, we don't have control over who's competing for that particular big grant that we might be trying to get. So revenue, revenue prediction on the research side can be more difficult. AI tools can help us there. AI tools can help us a little bit better with some of what those inputs and assumptions might be around revenue models and spending models that happen on the research side. We can also use that data in AI tools to do workload analysis and benchmarking, sort of going back to the training idea, really understanding, like, in your team, if you've got a brand new staff member in pre-award, for instance, you might start them on some of the easier proposals while they get their feet, learning about research admin, learning how to use your institutional systems and submission systems like grants.gov. But then you want to move them to more complex things. What AI can do is sort of break down some of the barriers and make it faster for you to understand workload analysis on that front. Like, you know, I've got my new staff member who's been here for 4 months and she's only seen NIH R01s. Let's move her to something else so that we have an idea of benchmarking people along with their skill to get them into more complex things and get their development up to speed so that they're helping the team and also developed in a way that we are paying attention to their next promotional opportunity. We can use faculty teams and opportunities. You know, I said back on the proposal development slide that we can work to use what they're already doing to figure out how they work together to push opportunities in that direction and identify teams that are working together that maybe could be working on bigger things and bigger opportunities using the same infrastructure they've already built. And then last but not least, you know, if you go to any major university's website, you will see a chatbot that has everything to do with student engagement and success. And those kinds of tools have been in existence for a very long time. We can do the same things with research. We can build these tools with our research knowledge from our research website to have a chatbot to ask questions around the data that we give it from our institutional policies and procedures and forms and personnel, so that there are easy ways of accessing that information versus navigating through web pages. So, I talked about some of the development opportunities and challenges. One of the things that I kind of want to highlight when we talk about responsible use and the way that you are working with your faculty on this is a lot of the things that I've talked about on the left-hand side of the chart are kind of about you managing your day and being able to prioritize things that help faculty by saving time on the other tasks you have. But the other side of it, and this very bottom bullet around data governance and access, is the other place. Because while you're a research administrator and a lot of your questions are going to be about proposals and post-award allowability of expenditures and how to submit through certain systems or how to get an account set up at your organization, you are also asked a lot of questions that you may not be the person to answer right away, but you often are sort of the person that guides them to resources to understand what they should be doing next, even if it's not something in your purview. And that's where I would talk about, how do we get them to use it responsibly? And some of that is being aware of what's going on your campus around data governance and use of AI. Like, does your institution have a steering committee from all the areas of campus that might use AI tools to move ahead and understand what governance and privacy looks like? And does your faculty member are they even aware that exists? Or can you keep an eye on the kinds of things that sponsors are saying about AI, whether they're federal or non-federal, so that you can provide good advice to your faculty when they ask you questions about how to do that? Or if you're somebody who's working in proposal development and doing opportunities for faculty to write proposals and get them reviewed in a space that is not a funding decision, but where they're, like for NSF Career Awards, for instance, or for just general proposal writing, can you provide them a safe space in a language model that is controlled by your organization to go through that process? So there are a lot of things we can do with AI, and the future is only getting brighter when it comes to the opportunities we have. I mean, there are things about the research admin lifecycle I didn't even say in this presentation, knowing that we only had an hour. And so there are a lot of things you can do around being aware of what the opportunities are, being aware of what's happening on your campus, to explain it to your faculty members so that they're informed about where they need to be careful, where they have a little more latitude, because you're basically providing the same guidance they would provide to a student writing a paper. They have a perspective on that, and you have a perspective on how the use of AI impacts research and how that world is evolving. And so for me, I think the real answers are use the tools, stay informed on what's happening with the entities that govern how we do these things, so that you can provide that information to faculty. And with that, I will stop and see what kind of questions folks have.
Awesome. That was amazing. I think we didn't have any questions come through on the chat, but yeah, if anyone has any questions at this point, feel free to come off mic and we can have a kind of open conversation. Yeah, that was really, really insightful. Thanks, Lori, for the talk so far. Okay, well, maybe I'll start off with one question then. Do you have any kind of you mentioned ChatGPT. Are there any other kind of products that you've used? Are there any kind of platforms that you've also tried out? And do you think some of them are better at certain things, others are better at others?
Yeah, so I've mostly used Copilot and ChatGPT, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of folks that are familiar with Copilot, because if your organization is in the Microsoft O365 universe, you have Copilot, so that might be the tool that your institution is signed off on for you to use. I have a strong preference for ChatGPT, and so I see in the chat, have others tried ChatGPT Operator? I've used the different environments that are in ChatGPT for a paid version that I use myself, and it is quite good. I think ChatGPT has a lot of really good coverage. That does not mean it's perfect. I mean, part of the responsible use, and I say that there are all these things you can do with these AI tools, and there are, but they still need your expertise as a research administrator to vet them and understand them and make sure that that the information that you're giving is correct, because we've all seen what they call AI hallucinations, where the information is wrong, and sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's really not funny. So.
Cool. We had another question come through in the chat from Jessica. It's currently in beta, but I fear our institution's legal team won't allow it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Before that was Melinda. You talked briefly about using GenAI for workload analysis. Could you please expand on how you would look at that within your institution?
So, I will tell you, there are a lot of assumptions in that little, idea for the future. So there are assumptions that you're using some kind of like, let's say it's proposals, and we're only talking about workload for proposals, that you're using some kind of an ERA tool, whether it's a vendor or something you built locally, where you have information about the proposals coming in the door, who has worked on them on your central team, and sort of working through like an analysis of level of complexity, like let's say weighting. So and that will require people in your office to say, like, NIH R01 modular proposals are easier than a NASA contract for a space mission, because they are. So like your NIH proposal would be weighted less complex than the NASA contract. So if you had a way of assigning complexities, and you have all this data about proposals that you've had and who they were assigned to and who worked on them, you can kind of get at who's worked on what and at what level of complexity are they working. And so, depending on how your team is set up, you might find that, your newest people are probably working on some of the more simple things, because you want them to learn how to do this, but they're also learning how to work at your campus. What are your institutional systems? Who do they call when they have a question? So they're not just doing research admin. But what you can do is kind of over time use that data and understand, like, what is the next step for that staff. So if you have your brand new research admin staff, who is working on NIH R01 modulars, you might look at the breadth of your proposals and say, what I want them to work on next is this next kind of proposal. Like, they can still do R01s, they've gotten really good at it, but we want to kind of progress them along a path. And that might be by sponsor type, that might be by proposal type. So there are a bunch of different ways of looking at the weighting, but it also allows you to look at, like right now, a lot of these ERA systems can be not very good at understanding workload assignments at any given moment. So that can also be a way of looking at what's a reasonable workload assignment for my, 5 proposal reviewers, if what I see every day is not the same thing. So if I've got, my new staff member who's got a lot of R01s, that might be okay, because I've got 2 staff members who are working on very complex, large proposals, and they can't take on 5 at a time. So some of it is this conversation and building the algorithm. What AI does is just make that faster. It's not that it wasn't possible before AI tools. It's just that it required a lot more development and a lot more mathematical expertise in a human being. So that's one of those things. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Just kind of gonna run through this quite quick here because of time. We got a question from Meg in the Q&A saying, I'm curious whether using it to find more targeted funding opportunities for faculty is actually accurate.
And I think, yes, it can be, but that is not super simple. One of the things that you need to understand about how something like that would work is truly understanding what your faculty are doing and how their career trajectory is progressing. So there are things that you already know about your faculty, but you don't know because you don't necessarily see the data all in one place. So if you have faculty members who are, they're submitting proposals, they are getting funded, but when I say submitting proposals, I mean things that are funded and not funded, because even the non-funded is relevant data here. They're getting awards, they are doing publications, they are teaching courses, they are also getting patents. That data combined together helps you understand how to refine the discipline that they might be applying under. And then there's other things that you know about them, like where are they in their career? There are opportunities for early career investigators that wouldn't be available for a senior investigator, for instance. So putting that data together is what can make those things more accurate.
Yeah. And I'm just going to quickly jump in here. That's one of the pieces that we work on specifically at Atom, is making sure, so we do have a whole kind of AI-powered proposal development platform that helps you generate profiles like Lori was talking about, in terms of using AI to pull in source of information across directories, personal websites, previously awarded grants, to automatically build up profiles of researchers in order to make accurate recommendations of grant opportunities that are out there. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the last 5 minutes of the call. I just want to make sure we get through all of the calls, but it was very relevant to what we're building here at Atom. Cool. So we had a question from Fran that I think she was next. What rules does everyone's institutions have if you want to pay for a ChatGPT account yourself? I feel like that's quite general, but maybe Laura, you could give an example.
Yeah, and it would not surprise me at all to say that you couldn't find a rule. You probably couldn't. What I would say your safest bet is to not, if you're paying for your own version of ChatGPT or another tool, it doesn't have to just be that one. I would say don't put institutional information in it. Do things that like if you're loading information for analysis into those tools, do things that are only publicly available, because I would be willing to bet your institution does not have something written down to say don't do that, but if they did, that's what they'd say. So I would say something like, if you're looking at an RFP for analysis, if that RFP was out there on the NSF website or your nonprofit funder website, have at it, because you're not sharing information that isn't already freely available. But I would say just don't put anything that belongs to your institution.
Yeah, I would second that as well. We have a lot of experience with the kind of issues around privacy. We're constantly taking in people's project ideas, these kinds of things, in order to make recommendations based off of the research that they want to do. You always want to, as Lori mentioned earlier, you always want to be using the enterprise kind of grade license. Otherwise, it is going to be, that information that you're sharing, it is going to be shared and trained on. At Atom, we're making sure that we're always using enterprise grade APIs, and so that information is never being shared. So yeah, definitely something to be cautious of. That was helpful. Alex Kish had a question in the Q&A on, so if a Microsoft school with access to Copilot and UBI, what thought would you have given to AI-enabled post-award monitoring of grants with a focus on effort, spend rate, deviations from proposal budget, etc.?
I would say all of those things are possible if you're using the institutional tool, and it's not training a public large language model. All of those things are possible with AI. Like one of the things is in post award in particular, like you mentioned, expended against budget, deviation, or even spend rate, like are they spending fast enough, and if they're not, is that indicative of a problem with the progress of it? All of those things are definitely possible with Copilot. That's not to say that it is easy. It takes a lot of work to build that data in and to train your local model to where you're getting the information you need, but that is a really good use case.
Cool. Just a couple more questions here from E.T. Carlton. Given the environmental impact of increased AI usage, what kinds of considerations are being taken into account for sustainability-focused institutions to be able to ethically and responsibly use AI while working to offset the negative impacts of this new technology?
Yeah, and I would say, we're not really there yet. I mean, in some of the places I've looked, and honestly, some of the best places that work is happening is with our own researchers. So institutions that have schools of AI and data science, for instance, are often really in the nascent stages of researching that area, and that's where we're looking. I can't say that there's been a great deal of understanding around that topic for our use that is changing the way we use it today, but I think it will be.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm the founder of an AI company, so I have bias here. But when you look at actually the kind of grams of carbon emitted per question asked to ChatGPT, it's somewhat comparable to sending an email, for example. So sometimes it can seem like a new technology is creating a lot of energy wastage, but actually, if you're saving 10 emails going back and forth, one could argue that potentially this can also be, a net good as well. Yeah. So last question from Raf, and then we'll quickly move on to a bit about how Atom addresses some of those proposal development things that Lori was talking about in the first part of her talk. So the question is, implementation and engagement at scale is always a challenge across all researchers. What strategies do you suggest to increase their AI usage and streamline the process to make it easy for everyone?
So that's a hard one. I think some of the strategies are around what is your institution doing that is visible to faculty on the AI front? Do they have a steering committee? Is there a way for them to engage? And the reason I talk about that is not just because it's about research, but also because if you're, I think best practice I've seen at a university in particular is an AI steering group that covers sort of the big areas of campus. So student-facing work, what faculty are doing, what research is doing, and what finance is doing. And when that sort of environment is visible to faculty so that they can translate some of the things that they're being told on the instruction side into research and vice versa, that's really helpful. I would also say that, that's sort of a big solution over a longer term so that they know there's a place to go to ask a question and to understand appropriate use, especially if your campus has policies around it. Some of the smaller ways, honestly, is creating these environments where they can use these tools safely. And for me, the sort of the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is in research development and writing, which could extend not just to your researchers who are doing this all the time, but also to postdocs and grad students who are getting their first funding themselves. So creating those kinds of opportunities where they can try it out, understand the limits, and use them effectively, those are really good ways to get these things usable for these folks.
Awesome. That was amazing, Lori. Thanks so much for kind of all of that. What we're going to do is we're going to quickly just talk a bit about Atom here. What is Atom? So I founded Atom with my co-founder Hamilton around 2.5 years ago. And generally what we're building is AI tools to help multiply your impact in research administration. And as Lori just mentioned, one of those great places to start is in research and proposal development. And so the kind of platform that we have available today is actually exactly what Lori was describing in terms of processing RFPs, processing supporting documentation in order to help researchers identify and apply to more suitable funding opportunities. So I wanted to quickly show you, what one of our listings look like and talk to you about how we actually generate these listings. So, you're probably used to platforms like Pivot, Grant Forwards, some of those other general grant discovery platforms that are out there. We take a slightly different approach. We don't just do traditional kind of web scraping. What we do is we actually pull in sources, from things like RFPs. If we wanted to look at one of these grants, it might have a couple more sources. And we actually generate the grant listings off of those supporting documentations. So instead of just taking what an NSF listing, for example, would show you on grants.gov, we can actually surface and highlight much more relevant information front and center for the researcher to understand, is this relevant for me at all? We can even go a step further and do kind of personalization in terms of showing you how eligible you are for the funding opportunity. So we actually help you generate those research profiles automatically of the researchers, looking at things like career stage, etc. And we can actually give you a kind of score in terms of how likely you are to be suitable for this funding opportunity. So this is all kind of using those same technologies that Lori's been talking about in terms of LLMs under the hood in order to power this experience. One of the other things that Lori was mentioning is the ability to throw in RFPs, etc., and start extracting information directly from that. And so we've actually built that into the entire experience as well, because we've already sourced all of the additional documentation, etc., on a kind of funding opportunity. What we can do is we can actually layer that chat experience into the entire kind of experience, so that researchers are beginning to interface with those AI kind of experiences front and center where they're discovering their funding opportunities. So here are some suggestions on, kind of questions that you could ask. So, if we wanted to learn some more stuff about eligibility, as Lori was kind of mentioning, the AI would go in and it would extract that information from the RFP and actually explain that to you, front and center, explain that to your researchers. If you wanted to go a step further, proposal development, these kinds of things, it's also able to help you ideate and these kinds of things, like help me put together some ideas for proposals, and the AI will go in and it will work together with you in order to kind of start understanding a bit more about what are the kind of things that this proposal is looking for, and then help you flesh out those ideas as well. So this was just like a very quick overview of, how we're starting to introduce AI into those workflows that your researchers are already used to. We have a ton of amazing kind of automation features in terms of helping your administrators actually create profiles for researchers, so you can automatically kind of source that information from across the internet, like Lori was talking about using AI. And off the back of that, researchers will begin getting newsletters, for example, with curated opportunities delivered directly into their inbox. So they don't even have to necessarily interface with additional platforms, and you guys can drive it from the kind of the admin back office. So, I think I just want to kind of round off here by saying, first of all, thank you so much to Lori again for an amazing kind of conversation. I think it's really really important to be kind of talking about these things. AI is definitely going to be a much, much bigger part of, everyone's workflows going forwards. And I think there are many ways for it to be supportive and actually help us do more with less. We're going through, frankly, some difficult times in the research ecosystem. And I think AI is going to be increasingly more important so that we can, support the research ecosystem and still keep growing, even through these kind of tougher moments. So yeah, Lori, thank you so much for your talk. I always learn so much when you talk. And if anyone's interested in learning more about Atom, I briefly went through very few interesting features, but there's a ton more. You can just scan that QR code, and that will take you to a link to book a demo. We can have a one-on-one chat. I can talk you through a bit more about, how to roll out AI in proposal development, these kinds of things. And we've got some amazing new features coming in the grant management space as well. So yeah, please reach out. Both of our emails are here as well. If you want to contact Lori directly, you can do so, her email. And yeah, thank you so much, Lori, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for participating. Glad to see you here. Thanks, Tomer.
Cool. All right. Bye, everyone.